What are the first steps that parents should take when they first realize that school refusal is becoming an issue in their household?
If they haven't already, the first thing would be to get a psychiatrist and a therapist involved with the child. That's really your first step to figure out from a mental health standpoint what they're saying.
Right.
But simultaneously with that, I recommend learning your rights as a parent to what the school district is supposed to give you. Because some people already have IEPs or 504 plans. If they have absolutely nothing, I would involve the psychiatrist and the therapist and then seek a child study team evaluation to determine eligibility for services, because your psychiatrist may be saying, or your therapist may be recommending what your child needs.
Yes.
And you're thinking, how am I going to pay for this? Well, you have a child in a public school, and the public school is required to give your child a free, appropriate public education. And children with mental health issues, which is typically what you're dealing with school refusal. Though sometimes we see kids with severe learning disabilities, but you're dealing with a child whose education is becoming compromised.
Right.
And that's what makes it upon the school to step in to act.
Okay, and I think I remember you telling me it's important to document every connection you make to the school. Is that true?
Correct. If you make a request, you make it in writing. If you have a conversation...
By email? Is that what you mean by writing? Because who writes anymore?
Well, email is fine unless your school district tells you they won't accept it.
Really?
Certain school districts have a policy, which if you go through all their policies on the Board of Education website, you would figure it out. But if not, you're going to find that they'll email you back and say, we do not accept electronic requests.
Gotcha.
If they don't, they're supposed to tell you.
Okay.
So in order to do that, to seek a child study team evaluation, you have to write a letter or an email specifically requesting that your child be evaluated by the child study team.
Okay.
And you have to provide that. We always tell parents it's actually better if you hand lock it in to the office of the director of special ed.
Director of special education. Are they usually housed in a school building or in the school district office?
Every school district is different. Okay. So some of them have their own, but you can call, you can ask if you don't already know.
Okay.
You walk in, you take 2 copies of the letter, you hand them the original, and you ask them to stamp the other one.
Okay, that makes good sense.
So that because there's a time clock. From the time you hand them that letter, they have 20 days to set up a meeting to determine what evaluations to do.
Okay, so those are the protections under the law.
Right. And that's where you got to know your rights.
I want to ask you a question as well, because I know a lot of people deal with the guidance department first, and sometimes they're the ones who get involved because we don't know this might escalate into something more serious.
The guidance department doesn't provide special education.
Okay.
The special education department does.
Gotcha.
And although this should work in a universe, in a perfect world, the guidance department would refer your child to the child study team.
Right.
The district has an obligation to identify all children with disabilities. Okay. It is not incumbent on the parent to tell the school. It's often a very much a hidden disability, and the students themselves try to hide it.
Right.
So that's where a guidance counselor should be on the lookout, because each teacher in each classroom may not, again, depending on the age of the child, may not see enough of the student to pick up the cues.
Gotcha.
But the guidance counselor should be in touch with their students. Certainly if a family is reaching out saying, I've been to a psychiatrist, my child is diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, what can you do? That's when they should help you and explain to you what your rights are.
Okay.
I tell parents that as soon as you know you have a diagnosis, the best thing you can do is contact the child study team. Self-identify your child as a student with a disability and ask them to evaluate your child.
Right.
In addition to the fact that many kids with mental health issues, many of those mental health issues are secondary to primary learning disorders that have gone unnoticed, often because the student is so bright.
Yes, yes.
We see this time and time again. Students who are highly intelligent overcompensate for their disabilities and succeed for years, and nobody knows it exists until they break down and they start into school refusal, or they have a panic attack outside the house, or they fall apart trying to write 4 sentences of an assignment that was given and they just can't do it.
Do you think that it might be possible out there that a parent says, I have a diagnosis, I would like to make an appointment with the child study team, I would like to initiate a psychological or psychiatric evaluation? What if they say, we don't think your child needs that?
So once you ask, they have, with that written letter, the written letter that
right.
you're delivering is key.
That's it. That's so important. Thank you.
You have to do that because once you do that, they have a legal obligation within 20
Right.
days to hold a meeting to discuss whether they evaluate.
Right.
The key in the meeting to discuss whether they're going to evaluate your child is not saying no. You have to say, I want my child evaluated. And when they say, we don't think your child needs to be evaluated, yes, my child does.
Okay.
Over and over and over until they hear you. And of course, if they deny and you have a child with a general anxiety disorder who's going into school refusal, who's missing school, where there's some impact on them and their education, then that's time to go call a lawyer to get help, to learn your rights.
Okay, so that's a good point also. I want to ask you, there are educational advocates out there and attorneys. So how do they differ and when is one appropriate?
You can use an educational advocate in many ways. And oftentimes the initial learning your rights or learning, what you need to do, what the steps are is fine. The problem becomes that you have a little harder time vetting an educational advocate than you do an attorney. There's no criteria to be an educational advocate. There's no certification. There's no legal training.
Okay.
So there are many wonderful educational advocates out there. And in fact, one of my associates used to work here as an educational advocate, and then she became an attorney, so now she's an associate here. So I think that some people think they're going to save money with an educational advocate, and that's what they're trying to do. Unfortunately, I've had clients who feel like they wasted money because the person they went to just wasn't able to effectively help them, so they wasted time and they wasted money.
Yes, I hear you on that.
So, do I think advocates have a role? And I think there's some great ones out there? Yes. Do I think that you can come to an attorney's office who isn't all about litigation and get the same services and perhaps get the help a little faster? That would be the way I would believe.
By litigation, you mean a lawsuit?
Correct.
Initiating one.
Initiating a lawsuit. You want somebody who's going to advocate for your child, who cares about getting your child the services that the law entitles them to as quickly as possible without really focusing on that attorney just loves to file lawsuits.
Yes.
It's about your child. It's not about us.
Right.
More school districts have learned today that if they step in earlier, the result is much better and they spend less money in the long run. And many school districts are starting to put more fail-safes in place for students with school refusal because the levels of anxiety among students have skyrocketed over the past maybe 10 years. And I think it's beginning to level off and level out a little. Many school districts have outside organizations they brought in, like Effective School Solutions, to run programs in their school.
Right.
Sage Day is another program that many districts use. In
New Jersey.
In New Jersey, yes, along with Care Plus. So these programs are valuable. And then I know other districts who've been very creative and created their own program.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I'm so excited. Back, 5, 6, 7 years ago when we went through our stuff, there was nothing like that. So
Absolutely
it's so
not.
great to hear that school districts are figuring that out, because if they have those programs in place and you see the beginning stages of it, they have an immediate solution at least, and it doesn't have to go on forever until it gets into the crisis mode. So that's very exciting to hear. So I wanted to also ask you, the IEP versus 504. Everyone asks that. Is there a way to break it down, make it very simple, and how it helps the school refusal child in terms of accommodations and services?
Right. So an IEP comes under the federal law. That idea is about remediating a disability. It's about providing special education, which is specialized instruction, basically,
Yes.
in the child's area of disability to help correct the disability.
Right.
Easy to think of it with a learning disability. Somebody is 5 years behind in reading. You're going to provide all kinds of reading services to pull them up.
Yeah.
That's an easy example. That person needs an IEP.
Mm-hmm.
But a student who may have, let's say, ADHD and gets distracted or can't organize, that student is going to predominantly need a 504 because they don't need specialized instruction. Now, that's not to say many ADHD students need IEPs. Many students with anxiety need IEPs because their form of special education comes in therapeutic counseling. It comes in giving specific education in the area of executive function
Mm-hmm.
that's impeding their learning ability, which is causing them to be overly anxious.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have that kind of a scenario, you can have executive function instruction, specialized instruction, often called study skills,
Right.
and resource study skills in New Jersey, where you're going to find specialized instruction for the student.
Right.
A 504 does not have an obligation to remediate anything. It's to just accommodate the student. So if your student doesn't need any specialized instruction, doesn't need any special classes, doesn't need even a second teacher, an inclusion teacher in a classroom, which for many students with anxiety and school refusal, what they need is a small setting.
Yes.
So in the public school, that's harder to find. So many times the inclusion teacher having a team taught class is the answer
Yes, I hear you.
for a student with school refusal.
Right.
It doesn't work for everybody. So that student would need the IEP versus the 504. The 504 is about, I need accommodations, I need extended time, I need specialized seating, I need to be able to get up and walk around, I need to be able to use a standing desk.
Right.
There's lots of accommodations, and you can deliver some things like OT or PT under 504.
Mm-hmm.
Most districts at that point will change to an IEP.
Okay. So with an IEP, what kinds of accommodations and services have you seen that are most effective in kids dealing with school refusal?
The therapeutic counseling is key.
In school, if they offer it?
In school, if they offer it.
Right.
And sometimes the use of a behaviorist.
Do the schools have a behaviorist?
Many of them do. In fact, we're finding more and more districts either have an in-district behaviorist or they're using a regional behaviorist.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear about that. And they're hard to find.
Right. So they have someone who comes in and who develops a plan
Mm-hmm.
to work the student back into school.
Oh, I love that.
Also, we've seen schools modify the start time,
Yes.
modify the door the student goes into the building.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to find the stressors and they're
Yes.
trying to reduce them. Maybe that they go in and they go to a counselor first
Right.
and they work with a counselor for
Mhm.
10 or 15 minutes and then ease them into the building.
Right.
Many schools have developed some very good programs whereby you're actually going into a program of kids who are struggling and then slowly you're working out into the mainstream. But if a student starts to have a panic attack during the day, they can always go back to that program
Mm-hmm.
where there are people who are able to actually help them and teach them the strategies.
Right.
What we found over time, whether it's in district or out of district, is that the kids who are being taught through therapeutic counseling strategies on how to manage their anxiety, where students are where staff is identifying what is triggering the child's anxiety and how to manage it and how to teach the student strategies to manage it on their own.